They walked away from their home on a grey spring day and simply did not come back. On April 30th, 1991, Conor and Sheila Dwyer went the 100 yards or so from their house on Chapel Hill to St. Patrick's Church in Fermoy to attend a funeral. They were seen leaving the church together. They were a familiar couple in their town, the kind of people neighbours nodded to and trusted. The next day, Sheila phoned her sister Maisie and spoke briefly. That call, the last recorded contact anyone had with them, was ordinary and short. There was nothing in it to say anything was wrong. Then silence settled over the Dwyer household. No one heard from Conor and Sheila again. When days became weeks, family and neighbours began to worry. Their sons had both moved to London and were not close by to check on them. Sheila's sisters called around, asked questions, tried to find any sign of travel or sudden plans. The Dwyers had travelled before, short trips, holidays, but they always told people when they planned to go away. The gap grew longer. On May 22nd, 3 weeks after that last phone call, family asked the Gardaí to check the house. Officers entered and found a home that looked as if the owners would return any minute. The beds were made, electrical appliances were off, some blinds were drawn. The couple's passports were still there. Glasses belonging to both Conor and Sheila sat on the living room couch. The mystery tightened around one missing object, Conor's car. The white Toyota Cressida, registration 5T797ZT, which the couple had used, was gone. In a case that would become haunted by this single absence, detectives and family both asked the same question over and over: where was the car? Gardaí later said that finding the vehicle was likely the key to understanding what happened to Conor and Sheila. For a couple who left their house with their passports and a secret stash of cash, who didn't empty bank accounts or take luggage, the disappearance of the car was a strange and telling detail. If you imagine this as a story in a book, you might expect a clear turning point, a trail, a witness, a sign. But what unfolded were small searches and larger questions. The River Blackwater runs through Fermoy, and divers searched it carefully. Quays around Cobh were checked. Ferry records were examined to see if the car had left the country. None of these searches turned up the Dwyers or the white Cressida. Appeals were made publicly, pieces broadcast on television, and a reconstruction of the couple's last known movements was filmed for a program called Crimeline in 1993. That appeal produced leads. People came forward with sightings and memories, but each thread pulled at another tangled, inconclusive knot. The trail would flicker into the light and then go dark again. In small towns, gossip runs fast and speculation runs faster. People wondered about debts or a sudden decision to leave. Others suggested darker possibilities. One line of inquiry, flagged by journalists and detectives, centered on Conor's work. He had held various jobs, hackney driver, plumber, and in later years had worked as a handyman and chauffeur for a German businessman, Fritz Wolff, who owned property on the outskirts of Fermoy. Because Conor had driven a vintage Rolls-Royce for his employer, and because people in a small town noticed grand cars, there grew a whisper of a German connection to the case. Gardaí interviewed Wolff and looked into the possibility, but tangible links tying the couple's disappearance to that employment were never established publicly. Still, the hint of something larger, of contacts and movements beyond Fermoy, kept investigators alert to the idea that the couple might have gone further than anyone first imagined. There were reported sightings after their disappearance that gave hope to some and frustration to others. A woman from Ballyvolane later told Gardaí she had seen a couple at the airport in Lords, the June after the Dwyers vanished, and recognized them when an appeal aired on television. In 1993, someone reported a sighting in Munich, Germany, a strange and tantalizing scrap of information in light of Conor's German employer, but Bavarian police and Interpol could not confirm it. Over the years, plenty of people swore they had seen the couple somewhere in Ireland or abroad. Very human hope sprang up around each claim. Maybe they'd left on purpose, maybe they were alive. Investigators treated many of these reports as well-meaning but unconfirmed. Over time, what was useful evidence and what was mistaken memory blurred in families that wanted answers. Investigations stretched into different years and different places. In 2000, Gardaí searched a quarry in Aherla. On a tip, nothing connected to the Dwyers was found. Their home was eventually sold in 1997 after a court order from the Bank of Ireland. The sale was handled in public and the family received proceeds as ordered. In 2008, RTE's documentary on One aired a program called Into Thin Air, which revisited both the Dwyers' disappearance and other unresolved vanishing cases. Reporters interviewed neighbors and the Dwyers' son, Conor Jr., who spoke candidly about the emptiness that his parents' absence had left. "I question myself sometimes," he told interviewers. "Why this? Why that? Why the other thing? How, why, when, what? I don't know." He spoke for many families who live with unanswered questions for years and then decades. To tell this story clearly, to offer a true documentary voice, it helps to understand the shape of ordinary life for the Dwyers. They were not celebrities, not politicians, not public figures. They were a married couple in their early 60s who belonged to a small Irish town. Conor liked cars, he had an eye for prestige, and Sheila kept the home. They attended church and funerals. They had sons who built their lives abroad. When you think about it, the ordinary details are the most painful. A biscuit tin with hidden money, a couch with 2 pairs of glasses, a house made ready for sleep. These are the things that tell you a life was paused, not planned to end. They make the absence louder. Investigators, constrained by the limits of what they could prove, worked publicly and privately. They followed up on tips and interviewed people who might have seen or known the couple. They checked ferry manifests and questioned people connected to travel routes out of Ireland. They dug into the Dwyers' finances and found no unusual withdrawals that might suggest a planned escape. They searched local waterways and land, as missing person searches often must, because water and remote ground are where bodies sometimes are hidden from sight. None of those searches produced the couple or the car. The absence of a body, the absence of physical evidence, made prosecution and closure impossible. Over and over the case returned to a single object, the white Cressida. Find the car, some detectives thought, and you find the answer. When a public reconstruction aired on television in 1993, it did what reconstructions do. It brought faces and memories into living rooms, it prompted fresh recollections, and it invited viewers to become witnesses. One woman claimed she had seen the couple in an airport in France after their disappearance. Another said she thought she had glimpsed them in Germany. These were, by themselves, not solid proof. But in missing person cases, memory is a tool, flawed, yes, and shaped by time, that can still produce useful leads. Investigators treated each credible tip with seriousness and tried to trace the movement of vehicles and people across borders and ferries. Investigators also had to confront the reality that memories get more unreliable the further they reach back. A sighting reported with confidence today might actually be a mistaken identity from 30 years prior. There are stories from Fermoy of the Dwyers before they vanished. Neighbors remembered Conor as a colourful character who loved fine cars and took pride in his appearance. The Rolls-Royce he sometimes drove for his employer turned heads in a small town that did not often see such luxury. That kind of small-town visibility can be both a blessing and a curse. It means people remember faces and license plates, but it also means that rumours can spread and impressions can harden into unhelpful assumptions. For Conor and Sheila, being noticed in Fermoy may have helped in some ways. It produced witnesses who could describe their last movements. But it also fed speculation about reasons they might have vanished, from travel to darker possibilities. Want to be clear about what we do not know. We cannot say for certain whether the couple left voluntarily. We cannot say they were victims of foul play, nor can we prove an accident claimed them. There is no confession, no body found, no verified sighting after that brief phone call on May 1st, 1991, that proves they were alive. That vacuum is what makes the case so painful. Absence is not an explanation, it is an invitation to imagine. Without definitive facts, families are left managing possibilities and police are left pursuing tips. This lack of closure became a practical problem as well. In 1997, their home went to auction under a court order, and the family had to navigate not just grief, but legal and financial steps to manage property that had been quietly waiting for an answer that never came. Over the decades, the Dwyer's case resurfaced in public attention more than once. The Gardaí put out appeals and re-examined files. Journalists wrote features that reminded readers this was not an ancient mystery, but one whose implications were still felt by people who had been young adults in 1991 and who had grown older while waiting for answers. In 2012, a routine dive by a local sub-aqua search and rescue team in the Blackwater led to the discovery of a different missing person's car and the remains of its owner, William Fennessy. That discovery renewed attention on long unsolved vanishings in the county and reminded everyone that cases where bodies are later found sometimes begin with the same kind of small public worry and the same long time spent without answers. In 2024 and 2025, Gardaí issued renewed appeals for information and said they were pursuing new leads. Investigators also interviewed surviving witnesses and original members of the investigation team, hoping that new perspectives or memories might illuminate small facts previously overlooked. I have watched countless cases like this in the archives, couples and individuals who disappeared without trace. And there are a few patterns that keep reappearing. One is the way ordinary routines create points of reference for investigators. A funeral attended, a cup of tea left cooling, a set of glasses on a couch. Those little household clues tell you something important. The people did not pack or prepare. Another pattern is the power of a single missing object, here the car, to shape the whole case. When a vehicle disappears with people or without them, it becomes both clue and symbol. It is a path that might lead somewhere, and when it is missing, it feels like the vanishing itself has figured out a way to hide the map. But patterns are not proof, and every new lead must be checked against facts. People who knew the Dwyers have described their bewilderment and sorrow in small human terms. Their sons, who live abroad, have spoken about the living nightmare of a mystery that will not end. Friends remember makeshift parties or the way Conor loved to joke. Neighbors talk about how odd it was to see the house sit untouched for so long. In small communities, grief is communal, and it gets folded into daily life. The missing become part of town memory, a ghost that changes how people view routine places, the church, the street, the shops, because of one absence. That communal memory is an archive in its own right, imperfect but real. It has kept the Dwyers' names in people's mouths for 3 decades and more. There are also broader social details to keep in mind. The early 1990s were a different time in Ireland. Travel was less ubiquitous in some ways and more in others. Record-keeping and cross-border collaboration were not as seamless as they might be today. Interpol and foreign police could check leads, but the technology we take for granted now, rapid cross-referencing, digital license plate checks, near-instant communication between agencies, was not the same 30 years ago. That is not an excuse, it is context. It helps explain how a case that generated active searches and television appeals could nonetheless leave so many questions unresolved. Let me put a human picture on one moment that matters. Imagine a kitchen where a biscuit tin sits in a corner. Cupboard. The tin has been used for years, a familiar hiding spot for loose change and small savings. In that tin is over 1,000 Irish pounds, placed there by hands that knew the town and planned for small things. When investigators opened that tin in May 1991, it told them something simple and profound. The Dwyers had not stolen away in a hurry to spend their money. They had not put finances in order for a trip. That one detail, the biscuit tin, is not glamorous, but it is crucial. It anchors the case in the ordinary, and the ordinary, when it is broken, can feel cruel, and yet human hope is stubborn. Over the years, people organized, asked questions, and kept the case alive in the press and on radio. Podcasts and documentaries revisited the Dwyer's story and placed it alongside other vanishings to ask broader questions about how societies care for missing persons and how we cope with unresolved loss. The Gardaí occasionally reopened lines of inquiry when new information surfaced. In 2023 and 2024, detectives said they had leads and issued fresh appeals. These appeals sometimes bring forward people who had kept quiet or who suddenly recalled a detail they had forgotten. Memory is not static. It moves and can yield truth when the time is right. People find different ways to live with the not knowing. For the Dwyer's family, it meant legal steps and public appeals and private moments of grief. It meant watching small rituals go on without them, funerals, birthdays, ordinary Sunday masses, and feeling their absence in each one. It meant keeping a room in a mind ready for someone's return that never came. Those who loved Conor and Sheila have told interviewers that the hardest part is not just the grief of losing someone, but the indefinite pause, the lack of a story to bring to a close. Many families prefer a factual ending, even a terrible one, to the limbo of silence. The Dwyer's family has had to live with the limbo for a lifetime. There is a certain quiet brutality to the public process of searching for the missing. A case becomes a file, then a reconstruction, then a set of appeals and searches, and sometimes a slow cooling into unsolved. That cooling does not mean the people who loved the missing have moved on. They have learned to carry unanswered questions. It also does not mean police have stopped looking. In the Dwyer's case, Gardaí have continued to re-examine material, interview witnesses, and follow leads when they appear, sometimes decades later. The machinery of investigation can be slow, but it can also revive when new facts, new technologies, or new witnesses emerge. When you study unresolved cases long enough, you notice how ordinary facts can become heavy with meaning. The white Toyota Cressida is not just a car. It is a silent ledger of movement and absence. The glasses on a couch are not mere spectacles. They are the last known presence of two people who shared a life. The passport in a drawer is a sealed question. Investigators look at these objects and try to read them as one might read a map to a lost place. Sometimes the map leads to fresh discovery. Sometimes it leads only to more questions. In the Dwyer's case, the map has been frustratingly incomplete. There is also the community's memory to consider. In Fermoy, the story of Conor and Sheila became part of a local history. People who were children when the couple vanished are adults now, and the memory of that strange, unsettling week remains. In the small shops and among neighbors, the Dwyer's names are part of a conversation that stretches across time. That continuity is important. It is how missing persons stop being private pain and become public responsibility. It is also how, years later, someone might remember a small detail that breaks the case open, another look at a date, a name, or a motor that people dismissed at the time. We must also be careful with conjecture. It is human to invent stories to fill the emptiness left by real facts, but in a documentary built on truth, we do not let stories replace evidence. Investigators looked into rumors about debts, about drugs, about suicide, but could not substantiate those accounts. Friendly speculation in a cafe is not the same as proof. The Dwyer's clean passports and the money in the biscuit tin argued against an orchestrated escape. The absence of any confirmed international ferry crossing for their car argued against a straightforward exit. None of the available facts, taken together, point clearly in one direction. After decades, it is easy to imagine the Dwyers as symbols instead of people, to let the mystery overwhelm the image of a couple who loved a town and who left a home ready for waking. That is why it matters to return again and again to the human details. A wife who phoned her sister and sounded normal, a husband who liked cars and worked for a local employer, a house with its beds made. These details are not dramatic, but they are real. They anchor the story and keep it from turning into mere sensationalism. The Dwyers were people whose lives were ordinary in the best ways, and that ordinary life is why their disappearance hurts so many. People who investigate missing person cases learn patience and the necessity of retracing steps. New technology, new witnesses, and renewed attention can sometimes uncover fresh avenues in long, cold cases. DNA databases and digital record-keeping have solved disappearances before thought unsolvable. That is one reason why police continues to issue appeals and to re-examine files. Something small and new can change everything. In 2024 and 2025, Gardaí renewed appeals for information about the Dwyers, saying they had a few leads and asking anyone with information to come forward. It is a reminder that even old cases are not necessarily closed. They can be reopened with a single, crucial recollection. If you listen to those who loved the Dwyers, you hear a simple request. Tell us what happened. The family's need is not for attention or for fame. It is for an answer. Their sons carried on lives far from Fermoy, but they never stopped coming home in their thoughts. Neighbors never stopped asking where the white car went. Theirs is a patience worn thin by time, not by choice. And there is something concrete in that request we can all understand. The human desire for a name and a reason, a closing sentence. To a life's paragraph, documentaries by design try to stitch together known facts and human feeling into a narrative that is fair and true. In the case of Conor and Sheila Dwyer, the stitches are small and careful, because the facts are few and the feelings many. We can map the last known movements, the walk to a funeral, the phone call that ended like any ordinary conversation. We can list the checks done by police, searches of water and quays, ferry records checked, an empty house with passports and money, the missing car. We can describe the efforts, reconstructions on television, appeals on radio, searches spurred by tips, and we can describe the results. No confirmed sighting, no car found in any port, no body recovered, no definitive answer. Those are the contours of the case, shaped by fact. I will not invent a final scene for Conor and Sheila, because inventing would betray what their family asked for most, truth. But I will say this. There is a kind of cruelty in open questions. They create a space where any possibility can be imagined, and that space can become a living thing in families' minds. For the Dwyer's sons and sisters, that living thing is a wound. They have lived for decades holding both the memory of quiet Tuesday mornings and the horror of a life interrupted. The public parts of an investigation, the television appeals, the reconstructions, the newspaper stories, are a form of solidarity, a public memory that says, we remember and we want to know. In recent years, renewed appeals have brought new attention and new pledges of inquiry. Investigators said there were leads worth checking and that they were interviewing witnesses old and new. That determination matters. It turns the case from a relic into an active file. It means the Dwyers are not forgotten by the institutions charged with solving such mysteries. It also gives family members the fragile hope that something, a detail remembered on a bus, a registration plate cited, a memory stirred by a television clip, might finally connect and point toward truth. And finally, consider the powerful, quiet twist that closes so many true stories about missing people. The crime is not always what terrifies us most. Often it is the ordinary things left behind that take on impossible gravity. A biscuit tin, a set of glasses, a house with beds made as if for a return that never happened. Those ordinary objects become the enduring evidence of a life interrupted, and they demand an answer. For Conor and Sheila Dwyer, the twist is not an invented betrayal or a melodramatic reveal. It is simply that a life of small shared routines, a house, a church, a short walk to a funeral, was interrupted in a way that left no visible end. That absence is the story's dishonored final line, and it is the reason their disappearance still aches in the town of Fermoy and in the hearts of the people who loved them. We end where so many investigations begin, and often, sadly, where they remain, with a community remembering, with detectives following leads, and with family waiting. There is no final scene to describe, because there is no finality yet, only the continuing search, the interviews, the re-examination of files, and the occasional fresh appeal. If you take away anything from this story, let it be this: missing people are not statistics. They are people with names and daily habits and families who fold them into memory. Conor and Sheila Dwyer walked out of their home to a funeral on April 30th, 1991, and then they vanished. For more than 3 decades, their absence has been the strongest fact in their story. The work of solving that absence continues, and until it ends, Fermoy and those who loved them will live with the hope that one morning, finally, answers will arrive. If you have information that could help, Gardaí continue to invite people with knowledge, no matter how small, to come forward. Sometimes it is the smallest memory, a chance sighting, a color of a coat, the sound of a car, that breaks a case. For the Dwyers, a small detail may be the hinge on which the whole mystery turns. Their names remain together in memory and in the file, waiting for the fact that will close the story with truth rather than speculation.